Sego, good morning. Um, so today is Friday, October, 8th or 9th. I've kind of lost track. Today is what I thought was the last day of the Spirit Walk. But the Native Women's Shelter posted on the virtual Spirit Walk event on Facebook today that we have until the end of the weekend to finish our walking. So it's good because it gives me a bit of leeway. I'll still try to do the 14.5 kilometers I have left to reach my pledge of 125 kilometers today. But if for some reason I can't and I'm missing a couple kilometers, I can always do them this weekend. But I'm still going to go under the assumption that this is the last walk and therefore the last video for this campaign anyway. I'm seriously, as I've mentioned, thinking of continuing these walk-in rants. We'll see. So I want to leave things on a kind of positive, empowering note, because, I realize a lot of the videos that I've made, well, the idea was to help people think about things, and these aren't pleasant things to think about. Systemic racism, genocide, land dispossession, and how settlers benefit from centuries of oppression and even murder of people. These aren't fun things to think about, especially when you see yourself as a good person. But it's still important, right? So that was the idea. And I guess I want to end off with some, positive thoughts about being involved and what people can do regardless of their personal circumstances. So, and I've mentioned some of this in previous videos, but I know, most of you came on board as donors over the course of the past 12 days. And, you have lives. I'm not expecting you to go back and, watch these older videos. And again, if you're somebody who's already involved as a settler, if you're Indigenous, if you're a racialized person, I'm not teaching you anything. In fact, as I think I said in yesterday's video, you might be one of the people that I've learned from. So, but in terms of being involved, and, a lot of this applies to any kind of social justice struggle for people who want to be allies or co-conspirators with people who are struggling to have their rights recognized and respected. So when it comes specifically to justice and reparations towards Indigenous people, I guess, I can start there. One of the things I said, I think in one of the first videos, was that symbolic gestures towards reconciliation, because that's been the buzzword in the past few years, without actual concrete reparations to, so that people can actually benefit from material conditions that allow them to survive well and be well and to flourish, well, then that reconciliation is meaningless, because it's just symbols and words. And they're important as a first step, right? Because symbols are powerful. We have an emotional reaction to symbols. We are symbolic thinking beings, and that's, one of the things that makes humans humans. But it needs to be backed up. So, as a colonial society, and again, something I've mentioned a few times actually, all the wealth that these colonial nations have, whether it be Canada, the US, Australia, anywhere there where there's been colonization, all the wealth of these nations comes from the appropriation, the theft, the exploitation of Indigenous lands, which has involved over the past few centuries the displacement of people. When you hear about reserves, for example, for First Nations people and communities, And sometimes some settlers think, oh, look, they have their special reserves just for them. What makes them so special? Well, actually these reserves are just a tiny, tiny fraction of the land base that was a part of people's traditional homelands. It's a form of apartheid, and for a long time, under the Indian Act, First Nations people couldn't even leave their reserves, even to go to another reserve, without the permission of an Indian agent, who of course was not Indigenous, representative of the federal government. So that's no longer the case. But just again, the existence of these reserves, it's not a favor that anybody is doing towards Indigenous people. Similarly, when people complain about, oh, they want government money, that's our tax money, paying for them to have their clean drinking water and houses and schools or whatever, that money, the fact that you have a salary, if you're here and you have a salary, that comes either from a corporation or from the government, somewhere along the long line of how money works. I'm not an economist, but it's clear that, again, like I said, all the country's wealth originally comes from that theft of land. So if money comes from mining and the sale, the export of the products of mining, lumber, water, fur, earlier in the history of this colonial nation, then again, these were all things that were, Indigenous people were moved out of the way, and their lands were taken and exploited. So hell yeah, even if you weren't around, you weren't one of these early colonizers, even if you weren't directly related to any of them, you're benefiting. I'm including myself in this, because the majority of my lineage is white settler. So I'm complicit in this. I benefit from this. I get a paycheck. I'm technically a government employee. So it's not, so that's why when you hear, for example, Legault recently, now it's like he's still denying systemic racism, but he wants to act on the recommendations of the Vien Commission report. And he's like, okay, well, we have to negotiate how much money is reasonable. The hell, man? That money, it's not like these governments earned this money of their, hard work. It's really, it originally all comes from exploitation of Indigenous lands. So anyway, I'm rambling because this really, it really frustrates me that people are left to think that somehow any money that is quote unquote given from the government to Indigenous communities is somehow some kind of favor or charity, and it's not. We're talking about reparations, and this is something I've said before too, in terms of, so that's at the wide society level. There's some discussion to be had in terms of, well, what is owed from our governments to Indigenous people. Then at the individual level, well, again, if as a person you're benefiting from this, well, there's a certain level of responsibility here. Now, obviously, I really think that the people who benefit the most are those heads of corporations, all the very wealthy people, whether it's inherited wealth or those few people who started from poverty and the rags to riches things. They got their, more chances are they had to exploit other people, and again, that money all comes from colonial theft. So I'm not about to tell folks who are settlers and who are disabled or otherwise marginalized that they need to kind of fork over a bunch of money, because this system it pits us all kind of into this hierarchy in terms of wealth. So definitely the wealthiest people are the most accountable in terms of redistributing wealth in a fair way, but we know they're the ones most reluctant usually to let go of stuff. But even if you don't have a lot of disposable income, I've mentioned before, there are ways to get involved. First, educating yourself, and I've been giving links, and I'm really hoping that you will all, if you're not already informed about these things, again, I realize if you're struggling financially, chances are your mental health is suffering. Chances are you don't have a lot of time because maybe you're working a shit job for low pay, and it's hard. But I'm hoping that you'll find a little bit of time, even if it's just an hour a week or a half hour a week. Just look at one web page. One of these reports that I linked to recently, if you look at one bullet point, watch one video. Yesterday I provided a link to a website that I helped put together. It's a board with many, many links. If you look at one of those, like bookmark it, leave it open on your browser, put it as a pinned tab, and once a week you go look at one of those things. And you can incorporate, there's a lot of great art to films, not necessarily documentaries. It's not all depressing stuff. I really, like I said, want to leave this on an empowering note. So go look at the amazing stories people have to tell. If you like to read, try to get your hands on works by Indigenous authors, fiction, nonfiction, whatever it is you like to read, poetry, graphic novels. It's all out there. Kids' books, those of you who have children in your lives, you can read them some fun stories by Indigenous authors with Indigenous teachings and fun stories, and you'll still learn through this. It doesn't, when I'm asking you to be informed, I also really encourage people to learn stories of resilience and the amazing things that Indigenous individuals and organizations are doing. So again, it's not all about money, although again, material well-being is important. We know, again, when people live in poverty, regardless of who you are, if you've dealt with poverty, you know that it's really hard to flourish in those conditions. So I'm repeating things that I've said, recommendations in previous videos, but again, I'm assuming that not all of you have watched them all. So if you're only watching this one, it's kind of wrapping things up. And hopefully this way that you can do something, you can inform yourself, you can, if you do have disposable income, you can on a regular basis send some to one of these wonderful organizations like the Native Women's Shelter, the Native Friendship Center, Resilience Montreal, Projet Autochtone Québec, Winter's Coming. A lot of the shelters like Resilience and Projet Autochtone Québec are looking for winter clothes for their clients. We are part of a colonial political system, so you can sign petitions, you can write to your ministers, you can, if you're the type that really likes to get in their faces, you can call them, you can go visit your MPs, or whatever they're called at the different levels of government, whether it be municipal. You can advocate for change, but again, always remember to follow the guidance of what Indigenous activists are asking for. So try to avoid the whole white savior complex. Sorry about the garbage truck. Gonna try to get away from it. Okay, I think I've escaped the garbage truck. Listen to Indigenous advocates, what they're saying people should be advocating for. When you see that there is a specific action somewhere, land defenders, water defenders, see what kind of support they're asking for. Don't assume what they need. Check their pages, and if that information is not there, find a contact person to ask. you know, sometimes in the cities you have demonstrations, and increasingly sometimes you have well-intentioned non-Indigenous people who organize them, but without consulting Indigenous people in their area. So you got to watch out for that. If you see an event and there's a demonstration, if it's not clearly indicated, find out if there's Indigenous partners involved before you attend, or, you know. So those are all little things that you can do. I invite you also to read up about allyship. A lot of Indigenous and other racialized folks have written about allyship and what that means, and how you don't get to just call yourself an ally. It's a verb. You ally yourself. You actually do things, and you're not looking for glory in it. There's no glory here to be had. A lot of allyship happens behind the scenes, and nobody's necessarily even gonna know. So those are things you can do. Obviously, if you do have disposable income, that you can, see it as justice, as wealth redistribution or reparations instead of charity, because charity implies power. If you see it as charity, it's like you're like, well, I can choose to give or I can choose not to give, and I can choose how much to give. And instead of seeing it as, kind of a moral obligation. And sometimes it might mean you might have to, give up something you like, that extra coffee. You can find ways, if you can find ways to save on a few little things so that you can throw a few bucks towards one of these organizations. Another place that you can give, there's a Facebook group in Jacky or Montreal called Settlement Reparations. It's a longer title, but I'll provide the link. And this is a place where local Indigenous folks can go, and if they need help paying a phone bill or buying groceries or whatever they need, they post and they ask for help. And settlers on there, most of whom are not wealthy people, give what they can. And so this is not something that you're going to be able to put on your taxes, but you're helping individuals. And again, it's about reparations, because when you think about people living precariously on their own homelands, it's a gross injustice. So yeah, those are things you can do. Follow some pages, follow different organizations. They're on social media. I'll provide a list of suggestions, and the more you follow, the more you'll see similar material, and you'll get to the point where I am now, where 3/4 of your feed is Indigenous stuff. Also, I follow stuff by other racialized groups and organizations that advocate for disabled folks and things like that. So really 3/4 of my feed is social justice stuff, and it's great. Finally, I will link to a calendar of events. It used to be local events. These days it includes a lot of online things for obvious reasons. But getting out to stuff, becoming involved in the community is really, it's a great way to, have that human connection. So, Jacky, Montreal, there are tons of stuff happening under normal circumstances, plays, workshops, cultural activities, all kinds of things, film screenings, art exhibitions, where you can go and directly learn from people. And it's a thriving community. I mean, I love going to things here in the city. I've gotten to know so many amazing people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, who are, creating fantastic art, engaging in powerful movements, and maintaining community, because it comes down to community. And at the end of the day, the message is always, we're all in this together. And anything that is done to empower, to help support the empowerment of Indigenous people on their own terms, supporting their sovereignty over their bodies, over their lands, over their communities. This is good for everybody. Okay, it's about human rights, but it's also, it shouldn't have to be about, oh well, it helps me too, but really it does, because at the end of the day, these values that are going to be engaged in through Indigenous sovereignty are about reciprocity and egalitarianism, and everybody's going to benefit from that. So thank you for, this has been one long video. I'm just trying to cram a bunch of things in here, but thank you for joining me on these walks, those of you who've been watching. It's really, this is one thing that I chose to do. I do other stuff. Some of it I don't talk about. I try to give when I can on that reparations group. Don't have a lot of disposable income, but I try to, use some of it in that way. I'm an educator, so I try to encourage my students, non-Indigenous students, in the same way that I've been encouraging you, and support Indigenous students in multiple ways through the work of the Intercollegiate Decolonization Network and other things at my place of work. So the Spirit Walk is something I do every year. Well, almost. I missed last year and I missed the very first year, but I've done all the others. This is the 7th year, so that means this is my 5th time, and I'm going to keep doing it for as long as I'm physically able to. And I hope that next year we'll be able to do it in person again, and I hope to see a bunch of you join us. We really have a fantastic time during the Spirit Walk, walking across Mont Royal, and it's fairly accessible because it's a smooth trail, which doesn't make it accessible to everybody, I acknowledge, but it's, you don't need to be a top shape athlete to do it. So so that's it. It's been great, and I hope that this was useful to folks. And I'm gonna stop rambling and just shut up and wish everybody a fantastic day, and we'll see you soon.